Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'll give it a few seconds to let a few people join in, but you're in the right place if you're coming for the panel on vicarious trauma. We'll give it a few more seconds. It always takes a while for everybody to log in, and I will get it started for all of us. So thank you for coming. So I think we're probably good to go here. So I'm Elaine Piermeyer. I'm one of the research analysts at CSA Research. I'm hosting this webinar today on the silent crisis, which is about vicarious trauma, and we're particularly interested in how it's affecting the industry. We have a rock star panel today made up of these four other people that you see on screen here. We're not going to do lengthy introductions. You can find bios of them in the promotion for this event, but we have Dr. Williams, who's a doctor at Texas Children's Hospital. We have Rosemary Williams. She's what I would call a resilience trainer. She's working at the Institute for Trauma-Informed Care at University Health. We have Ludmila Golovin, who we call Mila all the time. She is the president and CEO of in LSP in Texas. She's actually the one who suggested, let's go ahead and do a panel. So thank you to Mila for the suggestion. And then we have Andrea Henry, who is a very experienced interpreter who has worked in healthcare settings and particularly at a children's hospital. So for those of you who have joined us, you can do so via StreamYard, and we're at the same time on LinkedIn Live. It's live, so hopefully we don't have buffering and sound issues, so forgive them if they happen. What will happen is that if you post a question, whether on StreamYard or LinkedIn Live, we will be able to see it in the platform where we're hosting this, and we'll be able to tackle questions. We have an hour and a half set up for the session, and we'll spend the first portion of the session with me questioning our great panel on some of these topics. And then at the end, please give us a lot of information. We'll be very happy to hear what you'd like to know more about. This panel I have here could probably talk for hours on this topic. They all have done many students presentations, and they are the real experts. Now, I know we have some interpreters in the audience today, and I'm having a special announcement for those. Masterword actually suggested that we offer some CEUs for continuing education for those who have CCHI, IMI, and BCMI certifications. So in order to get CEUs, you need to attend the whole session up until the very end. And then at the end, we'll give a link to a form where you'll be able to take a few quick questions that will verify attendance and give you learning points. And the Masterword will then send you a certificate by email within 2 weeks to anyone who answers the questions correctly. The questions are pretty basic, but you do actually have to pay attention to what we all say so that then you can obtain the CEUs if you're interested. Because a lot of work, believe it or not, to processing this Masterword is charging $30 if you want to get those CEUs. So thank you for Masterword for enabling this, because normally CSA research does not do the CEUs. So thank you for doing that. So without further ado, the topic is vicarious trauma. And I want to start with you, Dr. Williams. You're a clinician at a hospital. You are a renowned speaker on the topic of vicarious trauma. You've actually published 2 books, 2 best-selling books on this topic. And I am going to trust you to explain to our audience today what is vicarious trauma and what are the signs that someone may be affected by it.
You know, we could give the textbook answer. and really be so complicated that I put
So
you to
I,
sleep in about 35 seconds. And I don't want to do that. I would really like to break it down into such simple terms that vicarious trauma is an accruing effect of being exposed to someone else's trauma, and that something that we necessarily hadn't gone through ourselves, but because we may have not personally experienced. For instance, in the language interpretation portion of that, you're hearing and interpreting someone else's experience, pain, and stress. Now, I think one of the things that we need to really be aware of, and I hope we get into this and through a couple layers of this throughout this hour, is that when we experience vicarious trauma, it's a slow, progressive toll on our own emotions that is so gradual that we don't even realize or may not even be aware of this seductive way it affects us. So basically, it's like putting an extra brick in my book bag of emotion each day and never unloading it at night. The first couple of days, I may not even notice the extra weight, but after weeks, months, 6 months, people around me may be saying, "Hey, Dr. Gray, are you okay? Are you having a bad? You're handling things a little differently than what you used to. You're not as chipper as you used to be." And we start noticing that our own personal peace of mind, comfort, safety zone, and just pleasure in life starts diminishing, and our stress in life starts being aggravated, and it's just an accumulative toll on us. And it's different than putting in 12 hours a day one day and going home exhausted, because the next day I come back and after a good night's sleep, I'll be back up to par. It's a emotional exhaustion that on goes and starts dragging me down, and I start experiencing physical situations, behavioral situations. It starts affecting my relationships. It starts affecting my emotional constitution. It starts affecting everything else in my life. Other people may be aware of it and can see it, but I don't recognize it. And I think that's probably the biggest fear that I hope we get into and really get down to the layers of it. But broad, non textbook response, that is probably the best that I could come up with.
your book back analogy, I think, is really great at explaining how it's cumulative over time, and it's not just like a switch necessarily. It can happen, but that it can also be much more progressive. Now, Andrea, you've been working as a full-time interpreter for the last 27 years, I believe. You have experience in a children's hospital dealing with tough situations. So, tell us a little bit, maybe through some example, why does vicarious trauma, matter in the language industry, and what does it look like in day-to-day work?
Certainly. Vicarious trauma means a great deal to the healthcare interpreting field, but it is really poorly understood. Interpreters do this work without an awareness of the potentially damaging effects of channeling other people's pain. We channel it in the first person as if it were our own pain, and being also the bearer of bad news, as if I were the provider doling out life sentences, doling out enormous disruptions to the quality of life for a patient and their caregivers. So what is equally problematic is that we do it without the recognition that vicarious trauma, that relaying very distressing, emotionally charged interactions, can degrade our performance. It's a bi-directional work. It's very different than conference interpreting, different certainly than legal. I think we're most similar to education, but we're doing dialogue. And it's a bit of a double whammy for the interpreter. It means interpreters deal with the burden of being both the voice that delivers a message that can destroy a patient, unintentionally robbing them of their sense of control in their life. For example, when a provider has bad news to share, it is my voice that utters those dreaded words. You have cancer. Your cancer is back. We did everything we could, but we couldn't save your brother. We've run out of treatment options for you. This is a lifelong disease. There is no cure for this disease, but there are treatments that may control your symptoms, but there's no guarantee. You may be in and out of the hospital for months. You may miss a lot of work. You may not be able to run around and play with your children. You may need a wheelchair, or it is likely that you will never be able to walk again. And the reverse of that is hearing things that patients say and their caregivers. You know, somebody's dying and you hear, take me with you. Please, God, take me instead. I'm sorry for all the times I scolded you. Please, God, don't do this. You know, all the things that you could potentially hear. It's very intense work, but it's all channeled through my voice. And it is that voice the patient hears and probably remembers for the rest of their life. And so I live with that and have to come up with a way to process it. But I think we need to think about the work itself and how demanding it is. And on top of that, we're dealing with very distressing information. And we're imagining it as ours, like the neuroscientist Pasquale Leone found. When you imagine something, your brain doesn't know the difference between the imagining of it and the actual fact. And so in a lot of ways, our brains believe what we say. We say it again in the first person, and it becomes our own. And in doing so, it becomes a bit of our own burden and a bit of guilt. And we do suffer second victim syndrome.
And thank you for these examples. They really illustrate, you know, the types of situations that the healthcare interpreters might face. You know, interpreters are typically more vulnerable to vicarious trauma than other lines of business in the language industry because they confront trauma or they're closer to the trauma on a day-to-day basis, whether it's in healthcare, legal, emergency services, etc. So um, the thing to remember, though, is that they're not the only ones who suffer from vicarious trauma in the industry. And here, I want to put Mila on the stage here. She's the CEO of the first LSP that was seeking vicarious trauma-informed certification. She offers extensive resources on the website of our company for language professionals on vicarious trauma issues. So, Mila, can you tell us who, besides interpreters, may be affected in the language industry, as in it's not just an interpreter problem?
Right. So, and first of all, interpreters on all verticals are affected by it in a serious way. So, legal, educational, government, social services, simultaneous interpreters. Imagine interpreting news about the earthquakes right now, or about the floods or the fires. So, all interpreters are affected by it. But translators are affected as well, and they're affected a little bit different than interpreters, because when you're translating difficult and transcribers, when you're translating or transcribing forensic documents, legal documents, documents that even describe, for example, right now the news about Lahaina in Maui, or the news about the school shooting. When you're translating this, you're also processing that trauma. It goes visual, kinesthetic, and again, it goes into our system. In addition to that, people who work in scheduling and project managers and project coordinators are affected. We get a call that comes in, and it may be Child Protective Services response. And then the next time we get a call, and we know that it may be the same family and the child is dead, or we're hearing why the person is being called to interpret. It's a refugee setting. It's a personal crisis setting. So, as coordinators and schedulers working in the role for scheduling interpreters, we're affected. Anybody who does quality review work, again, for interpreting, is affected. Anybody who does quality review and translation is affected. Anytime we come in contact with somebody else's trauma, we're going to be affected by it. On top of that, just in general, even if we're not in the language services industry, all we have to do to experience vicarious trauma sometimes is turn on the news. There is a plethora of negative news happening outside. And especially recently with COVID kind of exacerbated this. There is different levels of stress, and we were open to all of the levels of stress: the fear of extinction, the fear of mutilation, separated from our loved ones, uh, not knowing what's going to happen. So stress level, general stress level of everybody has already been elevated. This is why mental health is such an important issue at this time. So I cannot stress enough how important it is on the organizational level, and then, of course, on the individual level to pay attention to this.
Mila, and I think you touched on an important point here is like, that there's this trauma and we talked about, and there's actually a lot of stigma talking about mental health, not just in the language industry, but in general. So here I want to put Rose here on the spotlight because you're a trainer at the Institute for Trauma Informed Care at University Health. And what I would like to know from you, because you have experience with that, is how do you get people to move past that, to be able to get past this stigma and to talk about the issues like we're doing in this session today?
Uh, Thank you for the question. We need to talk openly about mental health. I love the fact that we have this open panel. We're discussing it. We should have more of these in our communities. Being mindful of our language, just like Mila. Mila touched on so many things, what's happening in our nation, right? And in our personal lives as well. We showing compassion, choosing empowerment over shame. But these are things that we want to educate ourselves first and then others. So at the Institute, we want to start with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, trauma, the basics. Not everybody knows what trauma is, the introduction to trauma. And then just like we're talking in this panel conversation, having more of these, but also our learning events, continuously giving education pieces and strategies, not just talking about, but how can we move past the stigma, breaking those generational, the generational trauma that comes with it. Growing up in a Hispanic family, we had a lot of stigma on mental health. So being that first one in our generation and our family to say this is where it stops, and it stops right now.
And that's very important. So I want to then turn back to Mila. So I mentioned before your company strives to be a trauma informed organization. So why did you decide to change your company culture to put this at the core of who you are as a company? And what does that mean in practical terms? What did you have to do in your company to be vicarious trauma informed?
So, as you know, we have started providing tools and raising awareness about this issue in the industry almost a decade ago. However, uh, as the big wake up call really came during COVID. And there was at one moment in time when we realized that 14 people in our office at the same time were dealing with the death of a loved one and still coming to work. And it was sudden, it became almost like a sudden awakening. And so immediately we figured out how we can organize resources, and actually got help from Tim van Denverdijk, who has a beautiful book, The Unwanted Gift of Grief, who came in and did a workshop with us and then provided one on one counseling on grief counseling. So that was the time when we started seeking how can we provide support as an organization. And what does this mean to provide organizational support? Well, first and foremost, it means making commitment. Um, like we said here, it stops now. Different cultures deal different with trauma and with the shame associated with it. So making it okay not to be okay within your company. making it part of the company culture to ask each other, are you okay? What are you dealing with? What's going on? And then flexibility that comes with it. Flexible schedules, need to work remote. Can we step in as a team if somebody needs to take 2 weeks off? Can we step in as a team if somebody can now only work, at late at night? Or what do we need to do? Mental health counseling. We do have, first of all, free resources available through our health insurance organization. But on top of that, we have mental health counseling available pretty much immediately. If somebody needs to reach out, they can reach out to HR, and individual counseling, confidential, of course, will be provided. We started meditation sessions. We have weekly meditations offered by a number of different people to our teams. Uh, a Zen room in the office, which is non denominational. It is also used as a nap room. It is also used as I need to spend some time alone room. It's actually soundproof and has very calming environment. Allowing to have people take different breaks when they need it, allowing people to talk openly about the topic of that, changing our processes and procedures, so we now have regular surveys going out to kind of measure and monitor the state, and what do we need to provide, and to support, how we can support our team. Being open to feedback, because ideas come from our team members. What do we need? Of course, having some fun events. Masterword has a fun committee as part of that. So organizing team building events and fun events. But when you're dealing with trauma, it sometimes takes such a huge toll on you that you can't actually be part of the fun events. You can't deal with that. So it's changing the culture, the everyday culture of everything you do, from the perspective of trauma awareness, and from the perspective, how can we show empathy to each other? So that's what it means within our company.
That's fantastic news. I think you're going to have a lot of people who want to just work for you after this great expose of all the measures you put in place to care for people and not just work together. You even see a raised hand here. So, that's really applaudable what you do now. Rose, I'm going to get back to you because you're one of those people that helps organizations like Mila's to reach this level and training to prepare for vicarious trauma certification. So why is it important for an organization to seek a certification like that? What does it mean?
Yes, thank you. Mila, I'm encouraged when I hear that. It encourages me because at the Institute, our role is to train in the city of San Antonio and Bexar County. Our county is Bexar County. And so our role is to train exactly what your organization does. So we want to start by, first of all, realizing the impact of trauma, not just talking about it, but teaching it, understanding how it impacts our individuals, our employees, our own selves, responding to the trauma. How do we respond? Our language, once again, and then recognizing those signs and symptoms, not just in that staff member or that employee, but with the families, because, right, it starts pretty much in the family. And I like to talk about the three realms of ACEs, in the community, in our households, and in the environment, right? And then we recognize those signs. We teach all of this. And then resist re traumatization. How do we begin to talk about that patient's from the hospital's perspective, about that diagnosis they just got, without recreating and re-triggering, those pain points, right? So we teach on that. You talked a lot about, Mila, organizations had to face issues they never expected. Look what's going on in the nation, like you stated, the pandemic, the community violence, all the politics going on, and we've had to find new ways. Here at they've done such a great job of becoming that. A trauma-informed organization can serve as a protective factor. That's how I like to look at it. That's a positive investment in someone's life. And it can support a sense of meaning and connection. Just like you were talking about the recharge room. I love the team, all of the things you talked about were those trauma informed care principles that we teach, enhancing safety, enhancing health and wellness. It's a positive investment, employee fulfillment and satisfaction. And then they take that home because our organization where we work at, that is our second home. We spend a lot of time. Not all of us are able to work from home. We've never worked from home. We've always worked in the office. So we have to begin to establish those protective factors and making us feel safe and also empowering us. So there's several things to talk about, but we provide all of the training when it comes to how about becoming trauma informed care certified. So I hope that I answered the question.
Yes, thank you. And I think it would be good for more organizations to look kind of certifications. I worked myself at an LSP for a long time, and I think we were far from a lot of the measures, for example, that are implemented afterward, and there would have been some benefits. And even though we're more translation focused, sometimes there's some translation content that, is more difficult to manage, or even just the pressure of the project managers working insane hours with unhappy clients. And, I've had clients yell at me myself and not be the most polite. That can still leave you in a position where the trauma might be a little different than the one from like some of the healthcare scenarios we talked about, but it's in many more places, and there would be a lot of benefits for more language service providers to take the lead, and for organizations like hospitals to require providers that seek those certifications because they care about the mental health of people working for them, whether as employees or freelancers. Because Mila, I think all the people that you do this for, they're not just all employees. You do the same for the freelancers working for you. Yes, I see the nod. So that's fantastic. Now I want to go back a little bit more to the interpreter perspective. And Andrea, not that you have that much downtime, but in your time as an interpreter, you have said that you developed a tool to assess the cognitive load of interpreters. And when we prepared for this session, you told us that about a third of the issues that you had tracked were tied in some form to vicarious trauma. So I was hoping you would tell us a little bit about your tool and the benefits of the metric that you measure and why it's important to measure items like that.
Yeah, certainly. So at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta and Emory University, we partnered together to develop and validate a tool, a metric in a sense, to assess demands on concentration and interpreter mental fatigue. And we're an interdisciplinary team, which includes Dr. Courtney McCracken, Dr. Scott Gillespie, there are statisticians, Kathy Murphy, she's my co-investigator, my co-PI, or co-principal investigator. She's a clinical nurse specialist in the congenital cardiac defects unit in our cardiology center. And then there's me, a staff interpreter. I'm a full-time interpreter and I do the research on downtime. But the tool we developed and validated is called the CFI tool. And CFI is an acronym that stands for complexity and fatigue in interpreted encounters. It's not a burnout tool. It does not assess accumulated mental fatigue or compassion fatigue, but it does assess cognitive load or cognitive effort, the demands on concentration during the encounter and the resulting mental fatigue. And like you mentioned, approximately a third of the factors that are being measured on that tool are dedicated to emotional distress or vicarious trauma. Though we didn't know really the term vicarious trauma back when we were in the process of developing the content. Thank you, Mila, for putting this out there so much that it's becoming something that's getting a little more traction in our field, but we certainly need a lot more. But the original intent was to aid in assessing complexity of the healthcare interpreter's work, not just time spent. It was developed and validated over many years at 4 different organizations with over 60 interpreters representing 8 different language pairs doing all 3 modalities, face-to-face, over the phone and VRI or video. So in over 4,000 interpreted encounters, the CFI tool was used by those 60 plus interpreters, and the results were really exciting. The CFI performed really well and proved our main hypothesis. We also saw some consistent patterns. And the reason this matters is now we actually have proof of what we already know. That's kind of how research is. You kind of have this sense of things and need to see how it works out when you do research, and if you can actually create a metric that shows how complex this work is, it can be very exciting, and that's kind of where we're at. But it's such an exceptionally demanding job from the standpoint of what you need to be able to do it. You need proficiency in a standard version of 2 languages at the very least. And then you need about, in healthcare interpreting, roughly 60 different specialties are what you're navigating on a daily basis. You just never know what you're going to get. And it's going to be potentially a diagnostic encounter. It could be a treatment related encounter, surgery, side effects. You just never know. And in any one of those encounters, mental health can come up. Randomly, spontaneously, tragedy can come up in terms of what a patient might share. And then, of course, bad news coming from providers and a multitude of different types of bad news. But the benefits of the tool are many, but the key one is really raising the awareness of how difficult the work of an interpreter is. And from the standpoint of healthcare and what healthcare is, we're not selling ice cream. This is people's lives. It's their quality of life. And there are many things being shared in those interactions that are very distressing and traumatic for interpreters. And so the tool has the potential to be a source of leverage for interpreters and their managers and leaders across the country to enhance working conditions by taking these things into consideration and justifying the need for more positions, potentially more funding and more help with preparing and coaching interpreters through these kinds of situations.
So in a lot of the different discussions here, it's not necessarily that you can prevent the trauma from happening in the first place, especially if it's the trauma of somebody else. You have to provide interpretation. Those situations are not going to go away. It's more about knowing how to deal with it and how to cope so that it doesn't affect you in the same capacity. So based on that, what I would like to do next is ask for some concrete examples of techniques that language professionals can use to better cope with vicarious trauma. And like all of you here, I know have workshops day longs on this. So I'd like to ask you kind of just like, what's your top one? And I'm gonna go one at a time and ask each experts to weigh in on that. So, Dr. Williams, I'd like you to start and tell us what's your favorite technique to cope with vicarious trauma.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll only do my favorite, but I want to interject right here that it doesn't matter what a person's occupational role is. It's breathtaking of the commonalities of the effects of how vicarious trauma has on everybody, no matter what their occupational role is. So it doesn't matter if they're language interpreters or they work in the hospital setting, or they're counselors or social workers or first responders, police officers, nurses. The commonalities of how vicarious trauma affects is so overwhelming. So, for instance, I was just diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease just a few months ago. So, my time's limited on this face of this world. Um, and how I deal with that is common on a lot of other people, and even and how you deal with vicarious trauma. So, the one that I want to just throw out there that helps me the most in no matter what kind of trauma is release. I have to release it. I can't allow it to be bottled up in me. It would be like me taking this bottle of soda and just shaking it up and shaking it up hour after hour after hour, and then eventually just twisting the lid off. It's going to spew out if I don't have a release built in me And somehow, and Mila's uh, room that she has is a beautiful expression of that. Release it somehow. But for me personally, that has been my savior of emotional stress is journaling. No matter what I go through, no matter what day of the week it is, I spend a few minutes in the morning and in the evening writing down my emotions. It took me 37 years to do that before I had open heart surgery, before my body and ACEs has literally affected every part of me. And I believe ACEs caused my Lou Gehrig's. Everything that I have is because I bottled it up. So my one tip and miracle trick, if I could throw it out there, is release it, write it down, journal it, put it somewhere. Don't hold it in because silence, like a cancer grows. That old Sound of Silence song is so true that it will turn into something that you don't want it to, and it comes back ugly. Write it down, journal it, release it, is my tip.
Perfect. That's a definite great tip that I think is very easy for me to deploy on whatever level. Andrea, I'd like to know what your tip would be, especially as an interpreter who confronts this personally every day.
Yes. Well, I think my top one, though I would definitely say I have at least three in terms of dealing with the distressing nature of our work and vicarious trauma. But I think that axiom, know thyself, is key. Like I think I know myself a little better at this stage in my life. I'm in my 50s. I know what I'm good at, and I also know what I'm not good at. I know, for example, that certain diagnoses do not affect me as badly as others. Um, and maybe they don't affect my sense of trust in the world as much. So I've gained a little bit of, like, I think there is a term like post-traumatic growth. I feel like I've gained a bit of optimism from certain cases that I've seen cured over and over and over again. And so they don't affect me as bad. So I feel like knowing that about myself helps me tremendously in terms of how I perform as an interpreter. And especially in terms of how these things have impacted me in the beginning of my career. So now I choose not to work in areas or do assignments, especially if it's outside of my full-time job, for example, where I might do freelance work, where I would be hit too hard. Like I would choose not to do that because I know that would degrade my accuracy. When we are distracted by work that either we're unfamiliar with or we're very emotionally charged by it, we can actually lose concentration skills and not be very accurate. So if I know I won't perform very well, I choose not to do those. I encourage that as well with colleagues just at Children's. We share the emotional workload, we share the burden. But I know that the patient deserves my best possible self. They deserve the best, most accurate interpreter. And if I'm not that person, then I need to recuse myself, or I need to not take that assignment. For example, if I'm aware that the subject matter is going to be abuse, rape, neglect, a tragic accident, or a severe vehicular trauma, if I'm given that information ahead of time, and if I'm a freelancer or even potentially at Children's, there's a way that we can help each other negotiate whether or not I can do that, or if I'm going to take it, then I've got to be really aware of how hard it's going to be for me to concentrate and do whatever I need to get that concentration, or share the wealth or share the burden with a colleague, because these interactions can be so distressing because of our own personal histories, our previous experiences with this and our work. And interpreters, by the way, have ACE scores as well. So if we're looking at it in the community and the patient population, the proportions are probably not any different within an interpreting team of high ACE scores and the potential for that kind of trauma and re-traumatization. But if we know ourselves and we know what we may be distracted by and therefore not perform very well, I think it's our responsibility to not take that assignment. And that could be in conflict with my ethics. So I know that I need to take assignments that I have the skill for, or that I have the ability to concentrate for. So I would recommend highly to ask for help. I work with amazing interpreters at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta at Eggleston, and we help each other. We share the load, and And then, of course, my other two, one is from Ludmilla. I do a breathing exercise where I exhale slowly. That helps me tremendously in the middle of an encounter. But I also do short bursts of exercise in between assignments. So if I know I'm going to go to a really rough care conference, so imagine 10 different specialties, parents, and the dispatcher says, Andrea, it's at 2 and say it's 1:30. I say, okay, I'm going to go void. I'm going to go hydrate, and I'm going to go do a quick burst of exercise. We have a tiny little gym at the hospital. And so I'll go and do just 5 or 10 minutes. And that has been proven in research, certainly, but in my own personal experience, it does help my brain sort of relax a bit, and then I can have better cognition. That's what the research showed, and I certainly feel it myself. So those are some physical techniques, but the conceptual one would be to understand who you are and what's going to trigger you, and try as your best to either be prepared for that triggering or to avoid it if you have that option.
Perfect. Those are all great techniques, and all of them, again, pretty easy to except maybe the one where you get to have a bit more say in the assignment. But I think we'll get to it in a second. I want to finish first. Rose, would you mind sharing your favorite technique to cope with trauma?
Can we hear?
Oh, I can't hear you. Are you muted?
Sorry about
There
that.
we go. There
My
we go.
favorite one is gardening. I had mentioned,
Hold
growing
on.
up with a mother that always went out in the garden. I never really understood that. I didn't like it growing up. But as I got older, I took a master gardening, garden master class. And, and so are you able to hear me?
Mhm.
Okay, great. And so I took a urban garden master class recently, and I was just amazed at how, how I learned so much about healthier outcomes. And also in the community, we invited our youth, we invited our older adults, and it really broke down, like, how we went through the pandemic and the socialization skills. But what I really liked was it's an inclusive garden to be accessible and enjoyable of all ages, abilities, and backgrounds. So that's my favorite, because I learned that gardening plants and flowers, they're gentle companions. And someone said, I like what the instructor said. He said, gardening saves lives. And so I've learned, actually watching something by simply planting a seed and watching that grow, and watching our youth and our older adults see that thing grow, that empowers them to come the next time. We have the garden that I'm talking about is right across the street from one of our clinics. And some of the doctors in that clinic even come out on their lunchtime. And so that means a lot, because we're just not empowering ourselves, but we're empowering our community that we sponsor and we support. So yeah, gardening has been within the past year. I'm still learning. I got a long ways to go, but it just makes me feel good. It makes me feel released, like Dr. Williams said, releasing of things. I don't have to talk. I just got to have fun. Your hands in the actual dirt, and just letting go. So I would say that was my favorite part of this, as far as trauma, vicarious trauma, and releasing.
Now, I have a gigantic flower garden in front of my house, because that is also a way of dealing with stress and having, just as you described, dealing with dirt and doing something that takes your mind away. I find that fantastic. Okay, Mila, we'll finish with you here this list of advice. I'm sure you have a lot too, but if you can share your favorite one.
Well, I think for me, the most impactful one has been, first of all, naming the emotion.
Mhm.
You can do that um, if you're by yourself, or you can do that if you're in the middle of a business meeting, in the middle of an account interpreting encounter, or in the middle of a heated discussion. You can name it in your mind. And what happens when you name the emotion in your mind is actually very powerful. We move the information processing from our amygdala, where it's basically we're responding without being aware of it, to our prefrontal cortex. And by doing that, studies show that we reduce our stress in the moment instantaneously by about 50%. So, by just naming the emotion, we can reduce our stress already. Now, exercise. Exercise is very good and very important, but how can you exercise when you can't exercise? And you are, again, in the middle of a business setting, or you're going and running between one room to another. I love this muscle contraction exercise. And that takes about 20 seconds. If you take a deep inhale, and then you focus on contracting every single muscle in your body as strong as you can, your fingers, your hands, your arms, your shoulders, all the way, and just be aware of every single muscle, and you contract it. Then you hold your breath for about 20 seconds, and then you release it and you exhale. And what you will immediately feel is deep relaxation. You will feel like you have just gone to almost like a yoga class or a massage. And by doing it 3 times, 20 seconds, 3 times, still, around 1 minute, you can actually have an immediate release of tension. And that's if you don't have access to the gym, or you don't have access to anything else. And then another form of release is gratitude. We hear, oh, gratitude, attitude of gratitude, lots of cliches. But what actually happens if you take a moment and you write down what are the things you are grateful for? And the reason I say write down, and it doesn't have to be pretty, it can be a scribble, is so that you engage all your senses. You engage kinesthetically by saying it in your mind. You engage auditory. You can, by visualizing it, you engage in a visual way, engaging all your senses and being fully immersed. And by saying, I'm grateful that I can breathe. I am grateful for a cup of coffee. I'm grateful for, hey, I delivered bad news, but that made a difference. The person finally knows what the outcome is. Just finding complex or simple things, even if you dealt with something very stressful, what is the blessing in the stressful episode or situation that you had? Let's say it's an end of life news, but you know what? Not knowing is worse than knowing. If you have uncertainty about what's going on, uncertainty about your condition, um, how did you help? So being grateful for what you were able to contribute today, being grateful for simple things, will rewire our physiology. It will actually affect us chemically. It releases different hormones in the moment, and it affects and rewires our entire physiology. And I highly encourage that you try that.
Well, Mila, I, I I couldn't help but tense up when you told us to tense up. I think it's an easy exercise once again to do it, and all the ones that you've all listed here. Looking at the comments from our audience today, people are loving these suggestions. It's phenomenal. Sometimes these tiny little changes make a big change in our day and allow us to really handle something that otherwise was a little bit more challenging. So I appreciate you sharing your wisdom, because there's so many different possible techniques, and knowing what worked for you, I find particularly great. Now, I do want to go back to what Andrea was talking about before, and the whole concept of the right to choice. I want to point out a comment from Rocio Rosiles in the chat. It says, if you are a staff interpreter, you don't have the luxury of choosing appointments. Now, Andrea, you are a staff interpreter, so how did you manage to create a little bit of a sense of choice, even though you want to make sure that every single person is getting interpreting, and there might be some assignments that nobody wants to do if it's a question of choice. So how do you deal with this whole right to choice?
Yeah, it's a very good point. So when I think about trauma-informed care for patients and caregivers, and I'm going to talk about choice from the standpoint of patients and interpreters, but it is a little complex. But when we're thinking about trauma-informed care for patients and caregivers, one key tenet um, of a trauma-informed organization is recognizing the importance of choice and leveling the playing field for families in terms of power. That's one of the key tenets, is sharing power, trying to find a way to not re-traumatize a caregiver or patient. Most trauma happens at the hands of other people. So the people around you in a hospital have the opportunity to not provoke that within you again, by understanding that at least giving someone choice could mitigate that sense of being trapped, or not having a choice, like most people feel when something has happened to them that's pretty traumatic or distressing or abusive. So when a patient requests a particular nurse to be their primary nurse, that is generally, at least at our facility and many around the country, it is honored, especially long-term patients. That is a standardized approach to not only satisfaction, but also quality care. And of course, you do it to the best of your department's ability. Likewise, when a patient or a caregiver requests a particular interpreter, I believe at some facilities that is something that they can do and something that is honored to the best of the department's ability. And there is much work to be done with this particular issue with regard to patients choosing their interpreter. I think there's an opportunity for our field to understand why this happens and how to address it. In my experience, patients may choose a particular interpreter because they've achieved a level of trust that may be crucial to the therapeutic relationship that they develop with the provider. Because if you think about it, if you don't trust the interpreter, you're highly unlikely to eventually trust that provider. And some of the reasons that a patient might choose and say, listen, I want Mila. She's worked with me multiple times. I want her. Why is the patient asking for Mila for this particular encounter? Or maybe it's a care conference. Because of a lexical alignment. Maybe Mila and that patient are on the same page with their terminology. They use the same words, the same expressions. Maybe there's psychosocial alignment and a successful navigation by Mila of register issues for that patient, culturally appropriate level of courtesy, culturally appropriate social skills. There's also potential for physical alignment. The interpreter attempts, maybe with this particular family, to create physically appropriate environment. They sit instead of stand, potentially. They level the playing field when it comes to height. Height plays a big part in power and certainly discomfort. I'm very tall, so I tend to sit all the time. I bring my own little chair everywhere I go in the hospital, because people have to strain to look up at me. So sitting is good for that reason as well. But the interpreter might be chosen, again, because of the tone of their voice. Trauma happens at the hands of other people. So if the tone of my voice is unpleasant to somebody, or it reminds them potentially of abusive situations or something that's been tough in their life, there's a good reason they won't choose me, and they should have that opportunity. These patients are often silenced, and what we're doing as interpreters is giving them a voice, but there is more to that voice than just the interpreter. It's also the choice of interpreter. And the appearance of the interpreter is a part of that: ethnicity, gender, the cadence, the way I speak, even the scent that I have, my shampoo, could be a provocative, triggering thing for someone. So patients have reasons for asking for interpreters. They don't do it very often, but they might choose one because of the situation and because they've achieved some level of trust. But when I think about interpreter choice, to answer the question in terms of us, yeah, it is very difficult at a hospital to say, I'll do this, I won't do this. We don't generally function that way on my team. But what we do is we help each other with different cases. So if I dealt with a death yesterday and it was pretty traumatic, if today there might be something really tough, like a really bad diagnosis, and I get the call, if my colleagues hear it, they'll say, I'll take it. Let Andrea go to day surgery and do something formulaic, do something that isn't going to involve a lot of distressing information. And so it's more of a teamwork process and a self-awareness of knowing that you may not be skilled at that particular encounter. So if I don't have the skill set for a particular type of encounter, including distressing information, I have got to be honest and stand up for that patient's right to have a good interpreter. So I think when you think about interpreter choice, we have the duty to accept assignments that we're prepared for and that we have the skills for, and assignments where I can comply with my ethical duty to be accurate. And if I can't, then I must decline the assignment. And, if you think about it, if I say I'm an interpreter that's a freelancer, say, and I've got an opportunity to do a job, they let me know it's going to be with child protection. Maybe I'll say, no, I'm not going to take that one. Maybe if I know it's going to involve abuse, neglect, or rape, I might decline it. Again, as a freelancer or on my team at the hospital, one of my colleagues might say, ooh, I'll take that. You had something really tough this morning. And so it's more of a process of helping one another, or actually declining something if it is something I'm not going to be able to concentrate in. It doesn't happen very often, but I think it should be there. I think it's a tough question, just like the commenter said earlier. I don't think most people feel they have that ability to do that, but I'm kind of hoping that's where this takes us, that discussing this as panelists and in the field, that we become more aware that re-traumatization for the interpreter is not what we want either. I really want my colleagues to stay on the front lines, and I'll do anything I can to prevent them from being traumatized if it is going to be traumatic. And that's for them and the patient, because a traumatized interpreter is probably not a very accurate one. But it's tough. I agree. It's not an easy question.
So let's actually take the question that Carlos Aguero just put in the chat. I think it just goes to you and what you were explaining about so the question is, how do you balance that? I oversee language services and I encountered that situation many times, but interpreters are not always available and it delays care. And it's ties to when you were talking about, okay, kind of this concept of, and so any strategies as to how to find out why the patient chooses an interpreter. Do you have, that also ties to the right of the patient to choose a different interpreter. Do you have advice here for this one?
Do I have advice for why they would choose? Say that again. I apologize.
Yes. So if we can actually put the question on the screen here, but the person is asking, are there any strategies as to how to find out why the patient chooses an interpreter and how to balance, the whole scheduling requirements?
So is this question for me? So I would say that in general, when it's happened where I work, it's happened because they've, like I said in those previous questions that we had, there's something about that interpreter that was well aligned with that patient or that caregiver. We've had it happen maybe once a year for the past 5 years. There's many of us on the team who are full-time and who have been there for years and years and years and years. And so if you work with a family for months and months and months or years and years and years, they become quite aligned with your lexicon, your vocabulary, the way in which you interpret them, how comfortable they feel in your presence. Personally, I've had requests for me for big, bad care conferences, the kind that people don't want to go to, the kind that people are terrified of what kind of news they're going to get about their child. And because they've found some alignment with my style of interpreting. I've also had a colleague of mine requested for a similar situation, for a very, very tough encounter. And again, someone who's known us for years. They come and they work with all the interpreters, but there's a few that they might feel that they're not going to be as ashamed in their presence. They're not going to be as triggered in their presence. There's something about their physicality, their tone of voice, again, their scent, that it puts them at ease for some reason. But we've had many request us, but they don't even know our names. So I think the assumption that managers might have that somebody asking for someone must mean that the interpreter somehow overstepped their bounds is a false one with most situations. I think we need to move away from that idea that the business model is what mandates this, that we got to keep the interpreters going and keep them going and not think about the patient's right to be comfortable in a really crucial moment regarding their loved one or themselves. But it is out there. Dr. Henner is a deaf patient. He's a cancer survivor. He is also a professor in North Carolina. He's had many interpreters, and he's struggled with the same issue. You get sign language interpreters, and he's made requests to have people that he's aligned with, and having an agency say, sorry, we don't do that. And I think it's a business model that needs to maybe be a little bit more in line and developed a little further to address patient choice. And to give these patients an actual voice means to listen to what they've asked for and what they've needed. And it is tough. That piece of the question that was, how do you do that with staffing? Sometimes you work around it. In our team, we've done that where someone is asked to go somewhere. So they get me working in the morning knowing that they're going to send me to a conference at 12 if we were aware of it ahead of time. And most of those requests happen for family conferences in my experience. And generally, we know about it way in advance. But I think it's wonderful for patient comfort and for their ability to choose.
Yeah. So this right to choice is important because it goes both ways and not just one or the other. Now, I want to also go back to a concept that when we were preparing for this session, Mila brought up. It was the concept of the triangle of care. And, what does that mean? Why is it important in the context of vicarious trauma?
Okay, so the question is, what does it mean and why is it important? The triangle of care and the role the interpreter plays in it. And I repeated the question, Elaine, because you were breaking up a little bit. Actually, when we are working or engaged, it doesn't matter, with a patient in court, at a conference, and in any type of setting, we read nonverbal cues from each other. There can be cues of stress, like the pheromones of stress, and we're just wired this way biologically, and it comes from our evolution and our survival. So, for example, if there is a herd of deer and one of the deers on one side sees a threat, they will exert the pheromone of fear, and the deer who has not seen that predator on the completely opposite side of the herd is going to start running and is going to react. So we have those pheromones of threat. We also have can exert love, the state of an open heart. We can actually smell love. We have receptors in our noses that allow us to sense oxytocin. So we feel and we sense each other. In fact, words represent only 7% of our communication. The rest are nonverbal cues. So, as we're engaging with any type of discussion in any type of setting, it can be a business room setting when it's a difficult discussion or a difficult negotiation. And if we're there as an interpreter, the person the people who are directly involved in communication with each other will be engaged in some form of interaction. And the interpreter's state, mental and emotional state, can affect that interaction. It's especially important in mental health interpreting. So, for example, if a provider sometimes can elicit aggression in a patient to show them how to first co-regulate and then regulate. And that happens through nonverbal cues. So if a provider is co-regulating with a patient, and then the interpreter ends up falling outside of the window of tolerance, is emotionally all over the place, cannot handle it, is completely maybe stressed out, using simpler term, by the encounter, the patient is going to sense that. And they're not going to be just reading the nonverbal cues from the provider, they're going to be reading the nonverbal cues for their interpreter. The same happens in the courtroom. The same happens in a business discussion setting. And it happens because we're biologically wired that way. So for us as a language provider, as an interpreter in that encounter, is incredibly important to be able to stay centered, stay present, and realize that we have one other added responsibility in addition to delivering information linguistically accurate and being there, and complying with all of the um, uh, professional guidelines that we have, and that is to remain centered. So it's very critical. And we can then project how we can apply that to actually leadership settings for those of us who are on this talk, who deal with teams, who work with teams, work with leading the teams. If you are out of alignment, you're actually going to affect the entire team when you are communicating with your team. The same way as if you are centered in the middle of a storm, you're going to keep your whole team centered in the middle of a storm. So it's very important. Sorry, I took it a little bit outside of the patient interpreting encounter in the medical setting, but I wanted to make this applicable to see how it really applies to every setting that we're in.
Thank you, Mila. And I know that we still want to have time for questions, and I want to ask you a few more things. So what I want to ask the panel right now, and we're again going to ask each of the specialists their viewpoint on that, but you've all deployed some of these techniques with yourself, with your teams, with the freelancers you work with. I would like to know what are some tangible results that you've observed from deploying techniques to help cope with vicarious trauma. So, Mila, I'm going to restart with you because you started before explaining everything you've done at your LSP. So, can you tell us what are the results? Is it paying off all this investment?
Actually, it does. The results are a better working team, better collaboration on the team. uh, if sometimes you see a person only working, I don't know, 2 hours a day because they have to deal with the situation at home, guess what? These 2 hours, the person is going to be very, very focused. And they're going to actually do a better job during those 2 hours than during 8 hours of completely unfocused time because they're very distracted with whatever is going on their personal front. So a better team is what we're experiencing.
Okay. Andrea, what about you?
That's a perfect segue. I was just thinking about our team. I think from the standpoint of results from teamwork and really, really negotiating with one another and collaborating with one another and our dispatcher, that ability to support each other through the operational aspects of the day, through the emotional aspects of the day, through the technical aspects of the day is hugely successful. But like I mentioned earlier with my short bursts of exercise. And by the way, I'm wearing my work clothes when I go into the gym because it's a short burst and I try not to sweat. So I do it short, but I try really hard to make it happen either before or after so that I can improve my mood regulation and also improve my cognition. And I do think it's hugely impactful for me. But even though we haven't gotten here yet, I do believe, at least in the field, that having more managers, more companies like Masterword, more administrators like Carla Fogarin, who was on another panel on vicarious trauma, who expressed that not only did she support her interpreters and the stress that they experience in their work, she had one of those fabulous Zen rooms, and also she made a recommendation to use a remote interpreter. So we have a lot of contract interpreters by phone or video supplementing us for all languages. And in her example, she said she knew the trauma would be too big, too immense for one of her interpreters. And so they encouraged the use of a phone interpreter in that instance to not re-traumatize that interpreter because she was aware of the content. So I think even though we're still learning about it, I believe when our leaders are aware of this and help us and they're willing to ask those questions like, how are you doing today, Andrea? How's it going? How's the stress? That is potentially huge. And recently our team lead has demonstrated this, and the stress on the team dropped almost tangibly in that he just started asking us, how are you doing today? What do you need relief? We also do get relief sometimes when we've been in a tough encounter for too long or too many encounters back to back. And that is something I'd like to see in the field in general, but we do have it at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and it's very impactful.
Thank you. And Dr. Williams, what about you? Any
Well,
tangible
I think,
results you want to share?
yeah, I think at least in my world, um, all the different effects that impacts that vicarious trauma can have, as far as anger and rage and morale and exhaustion, hypervigilance, and all of this. One of those that I noticed and recognized, and it took me years to recognize, was numbing. And I would numb myself to my own pain and sorrow, not recognizing that I don't have the ability, that when I numb sorrow, I also numb my ability for happiness. It affects both sides of my world. So when I numb at one section, it is going to bleed over into other sections of my life. So if I numb out at work, it's going to numb out in my personal life. So when I recognized that and I realized that it does affect my relationships, I didn't have friends for years. And until I became responsive to that and recognize that that numbing, if I don't deal with it, is going to affect every portion of my life. And that understanding and opening my eyes changed my entire world. It changed my life because now I have the ability of recognizing, hey, wait, I can't numb it. I have to deal with it. And because of that, the other parts of my world open up and blossom again.
Second, what about you, Rose? You train a lot of people in, being able to cope. So what are the results you see of all this training? What changes at these organizations?
My answer to that is we cannot be the Institute for
I think you're
Trauma
muted,
Informed Care
Rose.
Training. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me now? I think there's a delay.
Yes, no, we can. Yeah.
We're training and we're teaching, but we have to not just talk about it. We have to be about it, right? We've got to live that. So we're a small group. I like to say that we're small, but we're mighty. And so around the corner, we've got a recharge room, our reset room, right? Which we're able to go out around the corner and take time out. We also have our wellness day. Our leadership is like, take a few wellness days. We also have our Schwartz rounds. I don't know if you know what that is, but these Schwartz rounds are in the hospital. They're 1 hour rounds in which our clinicians, staff can process difficult patient experiences or community traumas to support their own well-being. So having that, the employee wellness program that I am a part of as well, there's a few of us. It helps us. It helps us to maintain every day. We have a great group here because of those factors, those protective factors. And then we also recently started a book club, we started with the book, How the Body Keeps the Score, right? And just one line, just one, it doesn't have to be a drawn out meeting, but just getting together and really talking about our own experiences, sharing it amongst us. And we have a great group that we trust one another. We know that when we confide in one another, it's there. We're safe. We're in a safe space. And UH does a wonderful job of providing all of those trauma informed care principles. We just this week we had an employee engagement survey because our leadership want to know: do you trust your leadership? How do you would you recommend someone to come work for the University Health? So that makes us feel good because it empowers us or listening to us. So all of those things are what we practice, not just teach, but we practice here at the Institute as well.
Thank you. So I want to make sure we have the time for a few questions. So if our audience wants to drop off some questions in the comments, we'll be happy to take them. And in the meanwhile, I'll do one more round with all of our panelists. This time I want to ask, what is the one takeaway that you want our audience to live with today? And Rose, I'm going to restart with you again.
Yes. The one takeaway I would say is recognize, I loved how everyone had their own perspectives and thoughts coming from their world, but recognize that trauma informed change requires commitment from one another, from your team members, all across work sectors. And no one requires an advanced degree, or education, a person that's educated to make this impact. So be that change maker and lead with empathy.
Thank you. Mila, how about you go next?
My one takeaway that I would like for everyone to leave with is it's okay to not be okay.
Good.
Be authentic. Be authentic first, and it's okay to not be okay. And make sure that
Thank you.
because that has a big impact, that has an impact on you personally, because you remove the unrealistic expectations from yourself, that I have to always be perfect, I have to always be that perfect person, perfect mother, perfect boss, perfect coworker, perfect language professional. It's okay to sometimes fall apart, not be okay. And it also allows within the team that you're working with for somebody to have a bad day and for us to show empathy. So it's okay to not be okay as a personal change and as an organizational cultural change.
Thank you, Mila. That's important for all of us to remember. How about you, Andrea? What's what you leave with today?
Oh, my takeaway would be for healthcare interpreters, just know that you're doing incredible work. And a lot of us are misunderstood, certainly not fully valued for our amazing brains and the ability to perform mental gymnastics and prolonged memorization under unpleasant circumstances. But remember how important this work is, how much these families depend on our accuracy and our performance. And just know that you've got the right and you also have the duty to take care of your mental health. The patients deserve that. They deserve the best version of us and the best, most accurate performance that we could provide. So take care of yourself, and whatever you do, just know that you are valued, and that at the beginning of your career, these issues are a little harder, but they do get better over time with some amount of resilience. And I would again call it post-traumatic growth.
Thank you, Andrea. And for you, Dr. Williams, what's the takeaway here you want
Yeah,
everybody to
I'll
live with?
piggyback on everybody else. I truly believe that my takeaway would be to try to be as present as we possibly can in the role that we are in each and every day, because you're a masterpiece, you are important, you're valued, and the people that we deal with, even if it's healthcare or interpretation or whatever it is, deserves our best presence. And in that, we need to be present with each other and on our team also. So look at people in the eye and ask that question, like Mila said, are you okay? If you're not okay, it's okay, but also take time to look in the mirror and go, are you okay? And then recognize if we're not, and be present in that moment and be the best we can be, but not be afraid to reach out for help if we need it.
Great words of wisdom here, and it's so easy to do and so easy to forget, and it's all a habit we all need to get into to remember to ask these very simple words and to take the time at that moment to acknowledge it. Now, I see we have a question from Eva Martinez Fornos in the chat that I would like our panelists here to answer. I'm guessing it's going to be mostly for Mila and Andrea, but it's how would you say vicarious trauma affects remote interpreters versus in-person interpreters? And do you have any other comments about the differences in these kinds of encounters? So which one of you wants to tackle it first?
I can start, and Andrea, you
Uh-huh.
can add.
Yeah.
So it affects remote interpreters just as bad as it affects in-person interpreters, but different. As you do engaging in remote interpreting, you do not have non-verbal cues. So from that perspective, telephonic interpreting is a little bit easier than video remote, because what happens in video remote interpreting, you actually see the person in front of you, and unless you tell yourself, I'm not going to read pheromones, I'm not going to read nonverbal cues, your brain kind of zaps out. Your brain goes, I see Andrea, I see Dr. Williams, but I don't see the rest of his body. I don't sense it. It tries to sense the sense. And so we almost are in the process as humankinds of rewiring ourselves right now. And you've heard the Zoom fatigue term a lot, and that's why it happens, because we try to read it, but we zap out. In terms of mental fatigue that happens and others parts of that, I would like to defer that to Andrea.
Oh, thank you, Mila. And thank you, Eva, for your question. So I would say, at least from the research, we did find that, at least in general, video interpreting and phone was much more fatiguing than face to face. We didn't even expect to see a difference. That wasn't what we were even hypothesizing about, but we were able to use the tool in 2,300 encounters at those three facilities, and we found that video interpreting was severely fatiguing with the same interpreters doing all three modalities. So that was a surprise. Video was more fatiguing than phone, and then phone was more fatiguing than face to face. But we haven't sussed or we haven't like defined why. That would require more analyses, and maybe we could find the money in the future to have someone do more analyses of all that data, to see if there's patterns and if there is something about video, and I'm sure there is. We just don't know for sure. What is it that's causing more fatigue for the interpreters? But I do know that when I did full-time interpreting in Portland, Oregon, in the beginning of my career, I did feel a sense of just being completely disconnected and having no skin in the game, having absolutely no idea who I was interpreting for, what the real goal was, and really whatever happened. I think the stress of that could compound vicarious trauma, in that you're interpreting maybe on video or maybe by phone, and it's a horrendous 911 call, right? And then you never know once that call is over what actually happened to that patient. And so that potentially, and I'm hypothesizing here, but that could potentially be a very compounding aspect of that work, is that you never get a chance to know the end story. And one of the benefits, I suppose, for me of working in a hospital is I often am aware of the end, and usually it's good. And so it is healing for me. But I don't know, Mila, with your interpreters that do remote, do they have that also occurring where they just feel completely disconnected and also sort of removed from the good news maybe of what happened?
Well, what happens is there's actually research that's being done in this field, and I think we in our future conversations may want to have panels where we connect interpreters with the research that's being done separately. But one of the things that yes, video remote is most taxing. After that, over the phone, and then in person. Uh, but one of the things that we can do, if going into an assignment that's going to be video, actually going into a Zoom call that's going to be video, in order to avoid Zoom fatigue, if we just tell ourselves, and remember, moving from the amygdala to prefrontal cortex, I'm not going to be able to get all the nonverbal cues. I will not see the full body of Helene or Dr. Williams. I will only see partial. If we just name that, and going into an over the phone call, going, I'm going to be blind on top of that. So I'm just going to breathe in, and I'm also going to be blind, and I'm just going to be present with what I have and do the best with what I have. That will reduce stress tremendously, because without that, our subconscious mind goes into searching, and it's like cannot find the answer, and we get into a very, very high stress mode, and we don't get the answer. So that's the one additional takeaway I would like to give to our listeners.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, there's also a question from Julia, and I think this one is definitely for Andrea, but will there be a link to the tool that Andrea mentioned prior? Andrea, where is that tool at in terms of releasing with the public?
Yes. So soon it should be available to the public and for free. We have to get it published first. We were unsuccessful last year with a few journals that we had attempted and an analysis that was still pending. And so we've got a statistician at Emory working on that. And once it's published and its intellectual property is protected, it's copyrighted for Emory University and Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, but the manuscript is the key for us to be able to then release it. So once it is available for people to have, it will be out there and it will be free, and it will be like any other tool in healthcare. It's digital, and you just sign a simple licensing agreement to use it in the way it was intended, and it should help managers, company owners, interpreters to understand their fatigue, but also have an actual metric like a score that is something that can be incorporated into the productivity number. And then that in at least in terms of helping a manager have more justification for the FTEs or the positions that she has or that he has, it gives them that opportunity to have a much more rigorous analysis so that they can either keep their interpreters or get more as needed or more money for more contractors.
Thank you. We also have a question from Casagero here. Wouldn't interpreting for the same patients multiple times create more attachments to patients' emotions or traumas than remote interpreting and not working and knowing outcomes? Dr. Williams, I actually want to ask you the question because you have a little bit the same issue with the doctors, right? When you see doctors multiple times, what's your reaction to a question like that?
Yes, it could. And I think we need to be aware that that attachment can do some pros and get some emotional trust in there that may be good, but it could also have a little, you could be emotionally attached, and we need to be aware of that in the process. Now, in the interpreting, I'm not in the interpreting field. The other two ladies may, or Rosemary or somebody may have a better thought on that. But yeah, it could actually, you know, cause a little bit of more damage uh, emotionally and more trauma if we are emotionally attached to those people that we're interpreting for or working with.
Yeah, and I'd like to add.
Anybody else wants to react to that?
Yeah.
Or Andrea, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it can be really tough for interpreters to maintain really good boundaries. And so one of the things we do at Children's, and it's a wonderful aspect of our leadership, is we're constantly talking and supporting each other in terms of understanding our boundaries. So we might have a family, to go back to that other question, request us, but you'd be surprised to realize that the person requesting the particular interpreter doesn't even know the interpreter's name. They just know to describe them. That it's that interpreter that's, this height, wears these clothes, carries this purse, or not. And so we consider it really important for the same reasons that Dr. Williams just mentioned, to keep good boundaries so that we're not going to suffer more pain potentially if there is a death. But we've worked with families, some of us who have been there 15 years, like Eva, who just asked that question earlier, and me. We've worked with some of the same families for over 10 years that are coming back for different reasons. And they get to know us, and they get to, like I said, align with our lexicon, our tone of voice, all the things that they are noticing about us. We are quite visible. We are really not invisible. But it is a huge focus for us to make sure we're performing at our best, which means we have to keep good boundaries. So we're appropriately engaging and understanding that is needed for the family in many instances, but we have to be constantly protecting ourselves. So again, we share the wealth. There's a lot of interpreters that say, okay, I'll take that for you, or let me take that, or can you take this for me? I'm afraid it's going to be bad news. And I just did a bad news one this morning, and I think I'm a little bit on the fragile side. But it's a really important point, and we need to, like any profession, have good boundaries. I usually watch the nurses. The nurses are really good at this, so they're good. They're a good role model for us to understand how it is that we create a relationship, but we don't go over any potential boundary or get too close to someone. But I think it's a good sign that they don't often know our names, but they know something about the way we perform, and that's what they want, and that means we're doing a great job. Same thing with the nurses. It happens as well. They want that nurse, but they can't remember their name. They just know that they're tall and they wear short pants, something like that.
Thank you for the answer. And I don't know about our audience today, but I thought this session was very enriching with lots of tips and concrete advice. A lot of our advice focused on the healthcare industry, but remember that vicarious trauma is not just interpreters. It's not just interpreting. There's other functions within LSP, pretty much everybody who can be affected. And there's lots of resources out there. Pretty much all of our panelists, if you look them up on LinkedIn, you'll see that they have resources that can help you further your knowledge on the topic. It's the end of our time today, so I just want to remind those of you who are certified interpreters with CCHI, IMIA, and BCMI, that if you are looking for CEUs for this event, you do need to fill out a form with a few quick questions to verify attendance and learning points. And if my team will link right now in the chat, that would be fantastic. So again, I mentioned this up front, but Masterword Institute will send a certificate of attendance by email within 2 weeks to everyone who answers the questions correctly. They're not trying to trick you. They're just trying to verify that you were there so that you can get your credits. And again, there is a processing fee because it's a lot of manual work to handle all of these CU credits for you. I want to thank our panelists. I think you were phenomenal, amazing contents that you brought with the team and where you were able to share some really good insights. On my end, I am not seeing the link here. So hopefully, am I missing the link here? So for those of you who need the link, I'm not sure it's working right now, so I will copy it from a different screen because it looks like it is not popping up for my colleagues. So let me try this here. Now it is there. So if you want to see use, you have to click on that link and to fill it out. If there's a question, reach out to us at CSA, but that should work. Thank you to our panelists. We appreciate the time. We appreciate you bringing awareness to this issue and sharing your wisdom that is so essential, that the rest of the time you charge workshops and whatnot on these issues. So we really, really appreciate this. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.